In the sweltering summer of 1975, the residents of an apartment building in Hamburg, Germany, began to complain about a smell. It wasn't just a bad odor, it was a thick, sweet, sickening stench that seemed to seep through the floorboards and stick to the back of your throat. The tenants complained to the landlord, blaming the man who lived in the attic apartment, a quiet, shuffling night watchman named Fritz Honka. Fritz was a man who lived on the fringes of society. He was small, with a severe squint and a crushed nose. He spent his nights at a local dive bar called the Golden Glove, sitting in the corner, drinking until he couldn't stand. He wasn't a mastermind. He was pathetic. When neighbors complained about the smell coming from his room, Fritz had a simple excuse. He said it was the soup he was cooking, or he blamed the Greek family downstairs, using racial slurs to deflect the blame. But Fritz knew the truth. To combat the rising stench in his tiny attic room, he developed an obsession. He bought not one or two. Hundreds. He nailed little tree pine-scented fresheners to every surface of his home. He sprayed gallons of cheap perfume over his furniture. The mix of industrial pine scent, stale alcohol, and the underlying sweet odor created a unique, suffocating atmosphere that visitors described as breathing inside a chemical factory. Fritz wasn't alone in that room. Over the years, he would lure women back to his attic. These were women who, like him, had fallen through the cracks of society. Homeless women, heavy drinkers, souls who had no one looking for them. They went with him for a warm place to sleep or a bottle of booze. They entered the room with the pine trees, and they never came out. Fritz didn't have a car to transport anything. He didn't have a garden to bury anything. He was weak and lazy. So, when these women disappeared, they didn't go far. Fritz simply placed them into the walls. He stuffed their remains into a crawl space behind his pantry. He shoved them into the attic eaves. This is the part that makes your skin crawl. Fritz didn't leave the apartment. It lived in Italiano. He slept in a bed pushed directly against the wall where the remains were rotting. He ate his breakfast inches away from the decomposition. As the years went on and the heat of the summers increased, the soup in the walls began to leak. Fluids would seep through the wallpaper. Fritz would simply paint over the stain and hang another pine tree. He would have gotten away with it forever, if not for a sheer accident. On July 17, 1975, while Fritz was at work, a fire broke out in the apartment. It wasn't even his fault. It was likely a candle or a cigarette. Firefighters rushed up the stairs. They kicked down the door to the attic. They extinguished the small fire quickly. But as the smoke cleared, one fireman noticed something strange. The water from the hoses had soaked the wallpaper and the drywall. A chunk of the wall crumbled away. The firefighters shone his light into the dark hole, and a human foot was hanging down. The police were called. As they dismantled the apartment, they realized the scale of the horror. It wasn't just one. There were 4 women crammed into the nooks and crannies of the tiny attic. Some had been there for years, mummified by the dry heat and the lack of air. The police found body parts wrapped in plastic bags shoved behind the sofa. They found remains inside the pantry next to the canned food. When police arrested Fritz, he was surprised. He didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. He admitted to the crimes with a shrug. He said the women had mocked him or laughed at him, so he silenced them. He didn't seem like a monster. He just seemed like a sad, dirty little man. The building in Hamburg still stands today. The locals say the smell is gone, but the story remains. It serves as a grim reminder that monsters don't always look like predators. Sometimes, they are just the quiet neighbor upstairs, masking the smell of death with 1,000 pine trees. Thanks for watching. If you found this story chilling, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest corners of history. See you next time.